And we're live. Hello, Justin.
Hello, Keegan.
We've got some juice to squeeze here today. I understand there's been some movement in the Canadian funding ecosystem, especially around food. I'm going to put all the puns here. We've got to squeeze some oranges. Okay, there's some eggs to fry. Okay, we got to crack a couple of eggs here to make a few omelets. All right, I'll stop. But here's the point. I want you to lay out just what exactly is coming down the pipe for funding, because the Liberal government is giving money to Canadians in various ways, and we're gonna break that down, like what kind of money's being given out, who is receiving it, in what fashion is this money getting spent, and then we're just gonna have a nice nuanced discussion on areas of improvement. What are we happy about as two entrepreneurs working to build food infrastructure, and what could we be more happy about? So yeah, let's start there. Let's take it away.
All right, well, let's dive in. Anybody in the food world may have seen this coming through. I know LinkedIn's been buzzing the last few days, but Mark Carney on January 26th, so just 3 days ago, the statement came out. They're announcing some measures to make groceries and other essentials more affordable for Canadians. So that's the slogan of the program. And the internet's been like all over the place. You see some people on the conservative side freaking out saying this is terrible, and other people saying, oh my God, this is so good. And what we hope to do is just shine some light on where money is actually going and what that means, and hope to provide some nuance to this conversation that can help us go beyond the binary of liberal and conservative, right? There are real implications to how our tax dollars get allocated, and those have impacts. And so we're going to talk about that. And what I say, or my opinion, might not be the right thing, right? And in a lot of ways, Keegan and I sometimes don't actually agree. Keegan and I have sometimes differing perspectives on how governments should and could allocate money. You might get to hear a little bit of our kind of economic philosophy coming through in this podcast. We praise nuance here at FoodWeb, and we really want to go into the nitty gritty. So before we go any further, just like at a high level, what was the announcement? Okay, I'm just going to be looking here. I have another window open on my notes, but so the first measure is a measure one, putting more money back in Canadians' pockets. So the government is introducing the Canada Groceries and Essentials benefit, formerly the Goods and Services Tax GST credit, which will give a one-time payment to low and middle income Canadians. And then for the next 5 years, I believe, there'll be other checks sent out in the mail, and the amount of that check will increase slightly over those 5 years to also account for perceived predicted inflation.
So wait, just pause there. Yeah, who gets that money, and like how often do they get it, and what is the criteria for them to receive that? Do we know the answers to those questions?
Those finer details are available on the government website. We can add a link to that page when we put the podcast out. The Department of Finance has a bit more of a breakdown, but at a high level, they say low and medium income. I don't know exactly the financial cutoffs for that, but those are available. We can send that link around as well. But essentially, the cost of groceries is just bananas and not good. So this first benefit is just helping the everyday Canadian access more groceries. That doesn't mean everybody's going to spend that check right away on food, but it's there to support because people are struggling. The other two things that the government announced was a fund for investing directly in food infrastructure. So we know that farmers are struggling. Climate change is making it hard to grow certain crops. So investing in things like greenhouses and the actual physical infrastructure we need for our supply chain, that was another announcement. So the government is directing $500 million out of their strategic response fund into this new bucket that will directly expand capacity and increase productivity for the food system here in Canada. They've also announced $150 million for a food security fund that will help small and medium-sized businesses expand things like greenhouses, abattoirs, and strengthen food supply chains. And then finally, $20 million is going to go into the local food infrastructure fund that has existed for a little while, and they're just like topping that fund up with another $20 million. So to recap, there's $770 million being directed towards infrastructure, and there's $11.7 billion being directed into the food benefit, the checks going out in the mail to help people with their grocery bills.
Awesome. So while you were breaking all that down and I was pretending to pay attention, I pumped the news link and the Government of Canada website into our unofficial sponsor, Simon. And Simon came back to me with the questions to those answers that I asked there before. So to answer those questions, at question number 1, who gets the grocery benefit? So it's aimed at more than 12 million low and modest income Canadians who are eligible for the existing GST, the Goods and Service Tax Credit. So you have to be a resident of Canada, you have to meet income eligibility, and then how is medium and low income defined? What are those thresholds? So it's about $56,000 net income for a single person with no dependents, and about $59,000 for a couple with no children, and then higher thresholds when there are children. So there's more nuance there. You got to go dig into it. And then, okay, how often do they get to benefit from this benefit? It's a one-time top-up payment sent by spring 2026, by June. And then after that, quarterly payments will begin in July 2026 and continue regularly each quarter, July, October, January, April. And then how much is the benefit? So the 2026-2027 benefit year, single individuals will get $950, which includes a 50% top-up plus increased amounts. And then a couple with 2 children up to $1,890 total. So cool. That's just like for your information about, I guess, what might be coming your way. I'm included in one of these brackets here. Yay. I'm not going to say no to money in my pocket from the government. I do have opinions about that, and I think we can actually infuse a discussion here, Justin, about universal basic income, because I think that'd be a cool just like side tangent for us to get into. But you laid out the 2 elements of this funding package and this benefit package here. 1 goes straight into the pockets of Canadians, and 2 is an infrastructure fund. And just before the podcast, we were just talking at a high level what this kind of means to us. And so I'd love for you to just kind of lay out the food web ethos on like how we feel officially about like the sizes of these buckets and how they're allocated. Like on the surface, it might feel really rosy. Yay, money in our pockets. But like, I think you've got some really valuable nuance to add here.
Yeah, so what I would say is I'll frame this in like upstream versus downstream work. So what I mean by that, downstream is, oh my God, like we need to plug this hole. There's an emergency. People are broke. We like the analogy of a Band-Aid. Like Band-Aids are important. If you're bleeding, you need to stop the bleeding. So put the Band-Aid on. People being unable to afford food is a huge structural thing. Wages haven't gone up, global supply chains, like there's a million factors, and you can't fix those factors overnight. So when people can't afford food, you feed them, right? We give them money, put them in your pocket, but that's a downstream solution. You're just giving money that's going to go in their pockets and get spent, and that money's gone. And you don't even know if they spent it on food or not. They might have, who knows, right? It's not like you're giving them food stamps. We're not rolling out a food stamp program. You're just giving people a check to go and spend on whatever they decide to spend on. So that's downstream. Upstream solutions is how do we stop all this running downstream, right? How do we fix the structural problems? And that's part of this announcement from the Carney administration. Some of that is upstream, investing $500 million into physical infrastructure to support the food systems, allowing farmers to get a full tax write-off for building a new greenhouse. I like that. I really appreciate that because that is real infrastructure, which means now this farm, even if there's a big hurricane, their strawberries are going to be protected, and we have local strawberries, which means if that continues to grow out, the prices don't need to keep going up because we have the domestic supply. So I'm all about upstream solutions, and that's part of the ethos at FoodWeb, right? So by making kitchens and other infrastructure more accessible for small food businesses, it means more food businesses can get off the ground and build a more diversified, resilient food economy. That's upstream work. We're doing what we need to do to make systematic change. So at a high level, my beef. It's so funny how so many of these things are like, it wasn't until I had a food company that I recognized so many of these like euphemisms are like, wow, that's really on brand. But I got some beef with this plan. And it's not at the surface level whether either of these spendings is good or not. It's the ratio between the two. So 11.7 billion with a B downstream funding and only 770 million with an M of upstream, right? What's that ratio, Keegan?
It's about 12 to 1, 13 to 1, maybe, just like rough
Right?
math. Yeah.
So a 13 to 1 ratio of downstream to upstream, I want these reversed. Or 6 to 8, or you know what I mean? We got to do better than that, because if we're spending that kind of money on downstream solutions, and this is whether you fully agree with the Conservative Party or not, the type of critiques that the Conservatives would typically give to something like this would just be, you're actually creating more inflation. You're just giving people money without addressing the structural issues. And a 13 to 1 ratio is just, you're not getting at the root of the problem. You're patching up some people bleeding out and you're handing out band-aids. And I get it. You need to. People are struggling. And the government wants to do something about that. And I'm not saying that giving people money is wrong. I'm just bringing attention to the ratio of the upstream to downstream.
Yeah. Okay. So there's some places for us to linger here a little bit longer, and I'm just like wondering where to dig in first, because there's some juicy bits. Okay. So FoodWeb. Let's just start here. For example, like we're an upstream centric company. Like we're staggering several lines between a social enterprise and like an infrastructure company. We're not quite a food and beverage company. We're not quite a software, like we are a software company, but it's like food tech, but it's not like an AI company. We're like staggering all these lines. And like in previous episodes, we've mentioned that, hey, some of this funding that like we're actually just ineligible for a lot of this stuff, like in the startup ecosystem. We're not quite a medium-sized business, we're barely a small-sized business. Like it's you and I running this thing. So yeah, we're not in any of these categories, but we're building in the direction of supporting infrastructure and supporting local food and small food companies and the small budding entrepreneur. And so I want you to elaborate on just, okay, that there's 700 million going to the upstream stuff. You mentioned that, okay, there's 100% rebate for greenhouses, for example. Like where else is this funding getting applied? Where else would you like to see it get applied? Where is the maximum return on investment from a social perspective? Like these are our tax dollars ultimately that we're talking about getting spent here. So put your legislator hat on and say, okay, where can I get the best bang for my buck for capital investment? If we only have $700 million to spend, where does that money go?
Yeah. So one of the announcement, like I'll start with the top up, the $20 million top up of the local food infrastructure fund. That funding is available for Indigenous organizations and not-for-profits to build local food infrastructure. So that could be a community kitchen, that could be a food hub, right? Like an aggregation facility with walk-in fridges. It's the actual physical brick and mortar infrastructure. And I know folks working in food that have gotten funding from that program, and it's done amazing things by putting infrastructure in communities. So a $20 million top up there, can we double it? Can we triple it? Can we 10x it? Seems to be a good fund. I have an issue of the hyper focus on nonprofits versus businesses, but that's that could be a whole episode in itself, but that's just a good place to go. This newer $500 million and exactly what the criteria are going to be, I'd have to go digging to pull out, but I more so just want to say increase it. Like, let's spend more money on having the actual infrastructure. Canada relies on so much imported food. And depending on how you look at Canada as a whole, like some people say the prairies feed the world. Like we export a lot of grain. But from an Atlantic Canadian perspective, from a Nova Scotian perspective, over 80% of the food we grow comes from out of province. That's bad. Like that leaves us very vulnerable to like scary stuff happening if our supply chains even just break down for a week or two. Like things get really scary. So invest in the infrastructure, right? We need distribution networks. We need walk-in fridges. We need warehouses to store food. We need farmers. We need more farmers, right? I've said in other episodes, the average age of a farmer in Nova Scotia is 59 years old. That's bad. We want the average age to be like 39. Like we want a light, young, fresh farming workforce. We don't have that. So by giving something like a rebate for a greenhouse, right? That's the type of thing that a young entrepreneur would see and go, like, maybe farming could be an eligible career because if I build 15 greenhouses, I can get them all tax written off and it can maybe push me over the edge to consider actually farming as a viable career without looking at the nitty gritty of how that 500 million is allocated. I would just say we need to like 10x that, put $5 billion, $10 billion into local food infrastructure. And I'm not saying don't write the checks, right? Because even if you are going to invest that kind of money in infrastructure, it's going to take time to build and have those effects happen. And while the rest of the world is still also giving us reasons for inflation, like the world is worlding out there. I don't know if you've been seeing the news. I don't know what's going on out there. It's the external factors are pretty intense, but we need more local infrastructure.
While you were speaking, I went and investigated what that 500 million is all about. So we can actually dig into, this is actually why I love AI, is because I get to let you riff and then I can come back with some answers and some, like I dug the field here, right? And like I've got some things that for us to talk about. Yeah, you can actually apply for eligibility criteria for the Strategic Response Fund. So the 500 million for grocery supply chain support is being drawn from the Strategic Response Fund, which you said already, but for-profit businesses incorporated in Canada can apply for this, so can nonprofits and so can organizations. Projects must align with the fund's objectives, such as improving resilience, reducing market risks, or strengthening supply chains. And these are just like general sentences that ChatGPT just spat out here, right? There's probably a lot more specific language actually used in these grants and the documentation listed on the government's website. So if you really want to do that deep dive yourself, which we encourage you to do, and tell us if we're wrong anywhere, right? What's the point in talking if we can't be right about this? And then projects are typically large scale and measurable in impact, meaning they should clearly contribute to national competitiveness or supply chain stability. Funding is usually based on demonstrating economic benefits such as cost savings, productivity improvements, job protection creation, or expanded capacity. And then the application process is you must submit funding request, yada, yada. All right. All right. One of the purposes of this podcast is to let everyone else into your brain, Justin. It's because since I met you, you've been screaming from the hilltops and climbing every apple tree in the orchard to let people know about what a state of crisis the food system is in, or how quickly we can find ourselves in a state of hunger, as not as an individuals necessarily, but as a society. And that's a state that I don't want to be in. Like, I've read history books. I know what happens when people are hungry, and it's scary. So when you say things like the local food infrastructure portion of this should be 10 times larger, I encourage everyone to listen to the rest of the episodes that we're broadcasting and tune in to the ones that have yet to come, because it's not really a topic that we can cover in any 1 hour segment on Food Web. It requires multiple angles, multiple discussions, multiple guests, even from a wide range of professions to come in and give their opinion. Because you've spent your education researching and identifying and becoming familiar with these problems. But one thing I've learned in my own career is no one cares about the thing that you care about as much as you care about it. And so it's a lot of work to capture that attention. And so I want to linger here just a little bit. And like, why is local food so much more? Why is that like the holy grail of this, and how does it fit into those buzzwords that I just sucked out of Simon there? Like Simon says, it's like supply chain resilience, job resilience, and all these other terms. Like, how does local food play into that, and like why, and then relate that back to Food Web somehow? Yeah.
Totally. It's okay. So let's look at the two different streams of funding that Carney just announced. 500 million for what you were just talking about, larger measurable projects, and 20 million for the local food infrastructure fund. So even there, we have another big ratio gap, even just within the infrastructure funding. Yeah, I use the Nova Scotia example because we're from here, and it's a great case study of a region that is very isolated from the rest of the country. So even people, if you're tuning in globally in other countries, there's going to be regions like this all the time where even within one country, some regions are more vulnerable than the others. So let's use an example of a greenhouse company, a greenhouse farm operation in Quebec. They're removing some of the interprovincial trade barriers, right? That's been in the works. We realized during COVID and with the economic crisis, we need to stop preventing ourselves from doing trade within the own country, like just remove those. And I'm very much in favor of that. But what happens if that money, part of that 500 million goes to some massive greenhouse installation in Quebec? Right? Quebec has a lot of renewable energy. They have a lot of hydroelectric. So heating the greenhouses is going to have a lower carbon footprint than if you put those same greenhouses in Ontario. There's reasons why big infrastructure goes where it goes. But what happens if there's an economic crisis or a truck driver strike, or like the railway gets like sabotaged,
or Quebec leaves
or
the
leaves.
Confederacy?
There's just so many reasons why in Atlantic Canada we might not be able to trust that the tomatoes grown in the greenhouses in Quebec are going to be able to reach us, right? Even just this big snowstorm. We've seen a massive snowstorm make it hard for food to get delivered into Nova Scotia from New Brunswick. We got that one little highway and a couple back roads, right? And so that's why like local is so important. And large centralized facilities have higher risk. If there's foodborne illness, if there's salmonella, if there's any of that in a massive concentrated thing, there's issues, right? If that greenhouse catches on fire, like I've seen things in the States where like a massive chicken plant will catch fire, right? And so rather than one ginormous chicken plant, I would rather see 45 medium chicken plants or small chicken plants. But as you say, the measurable piece, right? The smaller food businesses, it can be harder to measure and convince the government to allocate the money for them, right? It's, I want one greenhouse. It's how do you demonstrate the economic impact of one greenhouse? I want 8,000 greenhouses, and here's all the numbers, and here's the crop yields compared to the global prices. And I have accountants and bookkeepers and economists on my payroll that can write you the report to show you the impact. That's what we're up against here.
Yeah, I can interject here for a moment and add some tidbits for us to chew on. My career has been spent in blockchain technology, specifically Bitcoin. And one of the principles undergirding that technology is decentralization. It's basically strength in having no single point of failure, right? You can take any one computer out of that network and the whole network is just fine. So this is the principle that you're essentially referring to. It like take one greenhouse out of a network of millions of greenhouses and you still have millions of greenhouses. Whereas if with the example of that one massive mega farm greenhouse in Quebec, like if that goes down, then suddenly, great, that one greenhouse, it's going to feed 500,000 people every year. Like yippee-ki-yay, hoorah, awesome. What happens if that greenhouse fails or salmonella or XYZ reasons, right? Burns down. Well, then it's not feeding 500,000 people. So that's the cost of centralization, right? Like one of the words in the that I read off on the regurgitation of ChatGPT, it said large projects, right? Measurable projects. And we do know that government likes to sign bigger checks for bigger deals. One of the reasons for that is because it's less work for them to administrate. Actually, it's a lot easier to administrate from a government perspective one massive greenhouse that feeds 200,000, 500, whatever it is, at like very large number group of people than it is to facilitate 10,000 grants for 8,000 or 12,000 greenhouses, and each one of them requires an application and a vetting process and this and that, right? And each one of those people, they don't have that team of accountants, that team of bookkeepers, that grant writer, the lawyer. They don't have, most of them really don't have any of that to sit there and write all that stuff down and keep track and make good on all of the grant requirements. Because a lot of the grants, they don't just stop when you get the money. Like you have to write a report. And if you're the one farmer that wants that one greenhouse and you're going to feed 80 people in your community with that one greenhouse, if you build that greenhouse, great, you got the money for that. But guess what? Now you got to build that greenhouse and then maintain that greenhouse and put crops in that greenhouse and harvest the crops, then process the crops, distribute the crops, and abide by the rest of the laws that go along with food production. Like you're not paying attention to that grant. So a lot of the times administration of these smaller grants just completely is overlooked, right? It's just completely infeasible, top down, bottom up to facilitate these things, which is unfortunate, but we would like to see more of these smaller things get funded because we build stronger systems that way. This is upstream thinking, right? Harkening back to where we started this podcast. You said upstream and downstream. This is upstream thinking. We have to do the hard thing. And if we're going to spend $500 million on infrastructure, then let's just critique that one word, large. Can we maybe negotiate a little bit? Can we have some wiggle room a little bit on the word large and just even downgrade it just one to like medium?
Medium, all about medium, right? One of my professors, when I did my master's in entrepreneurship, I'm blanking on her name right now, Elizabeth Murray. So she talked about the missing middle in the Canadian economy, not just in food, but in general, right? And I see this a lot in small business. I read a report on Lunenburg County in Nova Scotia and like the farming, and there's 100 and something farms registered in just Lunenburg County, but 40 something % of them were only making 10, 15 grand a year. And that's a lot of small farms. And then you have the massive large farms that have wealth concentration, also concentration of waste. And like the middle is, we need more medium. We need more medium-sized businesses. And I want more small to become medium to gobble up market shares. So some of the bigger guys also come down into the medium bucket. And then we have a very big, diverse market of medium actors. And then I think some really good stuff could happen from that. As you say, administering a grant, if you get like 10,000 applications for small projects, that's hard to sort through and deal with and see if the money's going to go to the right place. But could we lower the threshold and have more medium things come through the pipe? That would be a happy zone for me.
Agreed. The happy zone for everyone actually is the argument that we're making. By having more of these small projects get off the ground, medium projects even get off the ground, that's okay. I'm like, if you have one of these large projects, a big element right now is AI and automation, right? But a lot of these smaller projects might be a little bit less suitable for that sort of thing. So you'll end up employing more people, right? So even what, like, one of the elements of that 500 million that we were talking about, like, one of the words there was employment and job stability and job retention and workforce strengthening, yada. Okay, you actually don't necessarily do that by going and building that massive greenhouse or those massive projects. Like, those ones are much more likely to employ robots, to employ drones and drone fleets. Like, field, like acre per acre, you'll have a larger surface area of land is going to be easier to maintain with robots. And as you downsize that, it's still easier to maintain with robots, but it just makes less economic sense to go and invest in that robot. Like, human labor still beats out that robotic labor force. And for as long as possible, we should be encouraging people and helping people, funding people to get those jobs and do that workforce development, and by growing food. Like, I love the perspective that 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, something like 98% of us grew our own food. And that number's just been shrinking and shrinking. It's just become a skill that has not been passed down because of, I don't know exactly why. It's just a sexy job at Wells Fargo and the Wall Street bankers. They sell a luxurious lifestyle. And to be a farmer is really hard. Like, I have such immense respect for people that actually want to do that job. I'm not among them. I'm a computer guy. This is my happy place. So I'm being hypocritical here. But at the same time, I can acknowledge that it's an extremely essential thing that these people are doing. And if anyone has any shred of a desire to go and pursue that career and apply technology to it, sure, great. Just go pursue the growth of food in any which way fit. Like, we need more people doing that. And to me, again, like, we do that by funding more of the small and medium people.
Yeah. And so I just saw a job post yesterday for a farm in Nova Scotia. Summer job, working 35 hours a week, $18 an hour. Who can afford $18 an hour to live on that? And that farm, that's probably the best they can do. Like, I don't think that they're greedy by trying to keep the wages low. That's just the state of the farming industry, which is why earlier I said the average age of farmers is 59. That's because young people just aren't picking up farming as a career. Do you remember when you're in junior high and people are like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you're like, I want to be a dentist. In that moment, I don't know how many people like truly wanted to be a dentist when you're 12. Like, for the few that are like that passionate about it, sure. Like, sometimes people just know their calling, but like, we have those types of conversations because we have a perspective of how much money different careers make. And like, we plan our life, like, how many 17 and 18-year-olds truly know what they want to do in life, but you chose that university degree because we need to point ourselves in a direction that's going to give us financial stability and a retirement and like a family and all these things. And unfortunately, farming just doesn't have that financial appeal. The farmers that I know are not making a lot of money. They love their life because they get to be outside, and that means more than anything to them. It's less about the money and more about, I want hands in the dirt. Like, the amount of research coming out now, that I'm not like a microbiologist or a neurosurgeon or any of that, but there's like benefits. Like, you're going to get serotonin more in your brain if your hands are in the dirt. I don't know how, but it's going to happen. But we need farming to not only appeal to the nature junkies. Farming needs to appeal to just youth in general that are wondering what they're going to do with their lives.
Yeah, you work the hardest and you make the least is how farming was framed to me as growing up. And it's like, that's not a great sales pitch there, folks. But being healthy for your life and spending your life outside under the sun with your hands in dirt, and by the way, microbiome, right? Hands in dirt, touching all the bacterias, and then touching your nose and your face and your eyes and your mouth and picking your teeth. Like, your gut is going to be awesome if you're a farmer. I hope. This is an assumption. Someone come tell me I'm right, please. But yeah. Okay. So anything else there to add, Justin? Because we'll segue. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, earlier you said this topic on just like how we allocate money from the government could lead into a conversation about universal basic income.
That's where I was going with this.
And so I had a conversation with a friend a couple days ago, and I'll keep this short, but like UBI for just everybody, generally speaking, is one thing. I think that has a lot of layers of complexity to be able to unpack. But the idea my friend put forward the other day was, what if we launch UBI for farmers? Like before we do universal basic income for everybody, if you're a full-time farmer, you just get a top up because you're a badass and you're a farmer and we love you and we respect you, and you get 40 grand a year just because, but we're not fully socializing the food system. That's a wage subsidy. And then whatever you sell is a bonus. So if you sell 50 grand worth of tomatoes, you get that plus you're a farmer, you get your farmer bonus. And I was just like, interesting. UBI for everybody. Like I don't know enough about economics to know what's good or not, but I would love to hear.
We can go there. Yeah. So First off, I love that idea. The UBI for just farmers, that's hilarious. And I haven't heard it before, and I'm all for it. Like I'm voting for that tomorrow. Okay. Because I'm a big incentives person, meaning incentives is really what drive human behavior, and packaged in incentives there's also disincentives, right? So it's the carrot and the stick. And if the government comes out and says all farmers get UBI, do you know what happens tomorrow? Bunch of people tomorrow go and decide to be farmers, right? How do you make more farmers? Give a subsidy. Just say if you go and become a farmer, you'll have more money. We're going to give you money to go be a farmer. You'll have more farmers. However, you'll also have more scammers go and pretend to be farmers just to get the check. So you also do need to consider that, right? We don't live in this magical world where everyone plays by the rules because they're all happy and hunky-dory. No, you've got like a good chunk of the population that's also out to get that handout. Unfortunately, like that's just the situation we live in. Now, okay, just hypothetically speaking, what would happen if we had UBI? Like as soon as we have UBI, I heard this said by some economists long time ago, but they said you can now predict the outcome of every election in that country as soon as you have UBI. The winner of every election from then on is the party that promises more money. And that's it. It's not a hard equation to figure out. I bet that this is an oversimplification because it doesn't always just boil down to money, but a lot of the time it does. And so the argument is, okay, we're going to give every Canadian $1,000 a month. Cool. Next election cycle, we're going to give every Canadian $1,500 a month, right? And it just becomes a competition to see who can get that number highest without completely running inflation amok. Now, I'm actually all for UBI because of the situation that I think we're in economically in Canada. At this point in time, like I don't see another way out of it other than to give people money to live, unfortunately. Like the other thing is that you can't eat money though. You still need to have the supplies coming in, and you still need to have the local food infrastructure making the goods to buy with the money. You can't just flood an economy with money, because the thing that happens after that is the money itself becomes devalued. And so that's a really important concept to spend your time thinking about and understanding. If there's more money in the system trying to go after the same amount or less goods, then the money itself becomes worth less. Eventually it becomes worthless, right? It's follow the English language trail there. It becomes worth less over time. Eventually it will be worthless. And that is where UBI, in my opinion, goes. But to me, it's a symptom that we're near the end of the money that we're talking about, in this case, the Canadian dollar. But we're in such a weird time that I think it's necessary, right? Like, I don't see how we lose a bunch of jobs and people aren't working and they continue to be fed without UBI, right? So I don't know how this all plays out. And that's why, look, everyone at the top of this food chain, pun intended, is they're already getting UBI in a way, right? Like the top of the funnel's already being funded. There's money being spent top down under the guise of trickle down economics all day long. If we spend it at the top, it'll eventually make its way to the bottom, right? That's Keynesian economics 101, and it's embedded in every fiber of the economic system that we live in. But so the issue is like, how do you get that money down to the bottom so that they are able to hold themselves up, pick themselves up, feed themselves, take care of their basic needs, and have some shred of hope of traversing Maslow's hierarchy of needs, starting with just basic security and having your stomach fed.
I'm so happy you mentioned Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because I want to take us back to Carney's announcement 3 days ago and that ratio, right? $11 billion on just checks in the mail over 5 years, 6 years, and only 700 million on the actual upstream infrastructure build. Okay. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs says in order for the top of the pyramid is self-actualization, but you need your shelter met, you need your this, you need your that. Okay. When I was at school studying sustainability, we had a class that really went into this, and international development studies, IDS, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs is just embedded in all of these things. If we're going to go and help some country in Africa that is rebounding from a civil war, and we need to provide people housing first, and we need to provide people food first, and that's where the World Food Organization comes in, and aid and all of this money, and we're going to send you pasta even though your culture doesn't eat pasta, but you need calories, and here's your pasta, because that's the bottom level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'd have to dig out the article. I bet you one of my professors, I could email her and ask, but there was this academic who was like, what if we flipped the Maslow's hierarchy of needs upside down? What if you didn't give people food handouts, and what if you just asked them what they need for self-actualization and let them build their own economy? And that's what we're talking about here. The Canadian government wants to spend, think of a pyramid, right? The bottom layer is bigger than the top little thing, right? There's $11 billion of bottom level needs and only 700 million for the real structural stuff that people are going to go and do. Flip that upside down, man. Give the people who are going to do the thing. Like, who's the expert in growing food? Farmers, because they're the ones on the ground that actually are experiencing climate change and are actually the ones who know stuff. You think some bureaucrat in an office is the person to actually know what we need to spend money on? No, the farmers are. So, like, give more money to the farmers, and not just the large ones, as we were talking about, but the small ones and the medium ones, because they're going to put that money to work better than any bureaucrat can. And that money is going to go directly into local resilience. It's going to go into creating jobs, and it's going to go in creating more local food available at the grocery store, which in the long run, theoretically, will keep the price of food from skyrocketing, and then we don't need to write people checks to go and afford food.
Yeah, so the price of food, I hate to break it to people, but it is going to just skyrocket because of the reasons that we posited earlier. Like, the more we spend, the more we go into deficit, the more Canadian dollars that are printed. It's not that the price of food is going up. The price of food is staying the same. The number that you see on the price of the carrot, like, that number is rising. The value of that carrot is the same. It's just that there's more money in circulation now. And so the number has risen, and the value of the carrot is exactly the same as it was before. Like, we perceive that as skyrocketing costs. And the reason why we perceive it that way is because wages don't keep up. If we want to talk about what a universal basic income might look like. Maybe universal basic wage increase would be like something that would actually help us, because there's a lot of nuance there as well. But what I'm saying is, when you work for money, you're actually engaged in a trade and like an economic transaction at that point in time. You're selling your time. You're buying money with your time. Okay, when you go to the coffee shop and you buy a cup of coffee, you're selling your money for coffee. You're buying coffee, and that's usually where we end that sentence. I'm going to go buy a cup of coffee. You never really say, "Oh, I'm going to sell my money and get some coffee." That's a weird thing to say, but that's what's actually happening. So when the coffee at the coffee shop goes from $3 to $4 to $5, the value of that coffee is really the same. You want that coffee because it gives you that hit of caffeine in the morning and it feels good. And everywhere around the world, like, that bag of coffee is like, the price of it is going up in a numerical sense, but it's going, like, it's staying the same relative to all of the other currencies in existence, right? Every currency in the world right now is being devalued. They're all going down. It's just who's going down faster, right? Right now, the Canadian dollar is going down really fast. It's really fast. And like, all of the policies that we have in place indicate that we're going to continue to have the decline of the Canadian dollar, and it's going to accelerate. So like, my take on UBI is, if we're going to hit this brick wall, you might as well have every Canadian sitting on a pile of cash. Like, it might provide us with a bit of an airbag. Like, line the pockets now, because the brick wall is coming. You get different varying degrees of pushback on when this brick wall is happening and whether or not there's an actual brick wall in our future. I think there's a brick wall. Like, I'm prepared to have that discussion with whomever wants to have it. But to me, that's very clear that's going to happen. So then the discussion is, okay, how comfortable do you want to be when we hit it? You want to be in a nice car with an airbag. And a lot of people they're just not in that comfortable spot. Like, we're all struggling, basically. Yeah. I don't know.
I think one day we might need to do just like a podcast on like money, just in general. Like, some of the stuff that you were saying, I was just thinking about, and I didn't want to interrupt you, but I was just thinking about how long it took me to understand that. And one of my profs from Dalhousie with a finance background, Andrew Burgell, he also like really helped me understand, like, what is money? What does
Yeah.
it mean when the government puts more money
Prints
into
it.
the money supply? And it took me like 2 years and several courses with him and reading your old newsletter and like watching some videos because I'm a nerd and I wanted to learn more. It really took me time to understand. So if you're listening to this and you're totally lost in what Keegan just talked about, like, I would have been too the first time I was hearing that. Like, but it's important to really understand these things. Like, we're living through hyperinflation, and to
Yes.
really truly understand the mechanics of money is crucial, especially as voters, right? If you're out there caught in the binary of like conservatives versus liberals, let's get into the nuance. Like, where's the party of nuance? Let's just look at the budget, right? There's things that I agree with the conservatives on, and there's things I disagree with. There's things I agree with the liberals on, and there's things I disagree with. I don't often agree with much of what the NDP has to say, but that's a just they love spending money. They're just like, let's spend it all and give everybody all the money and fix all the problems. And it's like, no, because that'll create like whatever hyper inflation is, right? Like, how we spend money as a society. Like, when we pay taxes, our property tax funds our municipality. The municipality now has money to go do stuff, right? We also pay provincial tax, and we also pay federal tax, and then we pay income tax. There's all these buckets of our money that gets spent. And to understand those mechanics will make you more informed as a voter, right? What do you want to see? What elected people do you want representing you? This matters, right? It's not just about the high level, oh, the conservatives are this and the liberals are this. It's, like, I was in the Halifax riding and I voted for Shannon Miedema because I knew people who knew her and vouched for her. I was like, I want that woman in the House of Commons representing me because I believe that she knows and she's smart and she's intelligent and she won. Thank you. Props to Shannon. You're out there repping for Halifax. But the public needs to be more informed, right? And at that municipal level, like that's a level of government you can get involved in pretty easily. There's committees you can join, there's things you can do, and you can influence where this money goes into your community. That's just my soapbox on financial literacy is a big passion of mine. I know it's a big passion of Keegan's. And
Huge.
I think sometimes our podcast can take for granted that not everybody will have the language to fully understand. So I just want to name that. And maybe we do a bonus episode, just a tutorial and a breakdown on the mechanics of money to allow these things to be contextualized.
We should absolutely do that episode at some point in time. So subscribe to get notified when that episode is released. But like we'll also break down that political structure about how money's used and the decision-making process and how it's allocated. Like I'm a really big fan in like basically the closer to me that I spend my taxes, the more in favor I am of it, of the tax. That's my general rule. So like municipal taxes, great. Awesome. Chances are those dollars that go into that municipal slush fund, like those are going to get spent on things that are at least in proximity to me and therefore going to benefit me in some tangible way. And then as we scale up, I have different opinions and we can cover that in other episodes. Yeah, that's another podcast discussion. And like you said there, Justin, this is financial literacy. You mentioned that it's easy to get involved in government, and I just respectfully disagree. But for the opinion that I'm just so bored and like apathetic, and what is it? I'm unenthused by the prospect of how slowly it moves, how slowly the apparatus moves, and it feels disheartening. And so that's why I always come back to you vote with your dollar, because that's the way in which you do affect political and economic change on a daily basis. Every single time you spend money is a vote. I believe that completely. And it's not like a conclusion or like a phrase that's fun to say that I've just, oh, this will be a good little hook on Instagram. No, it's not. That is the absolute truth. And like to the degree that I think it's more powerful than the vote you get in your elections. I really believe that. And so when we do our podcast on money, like we can dig into in as much depth as required exactly why I believe that to the degree that we do. Yeah.
And just as you were saying that, we say that a lot, you vote with your dollar, and I agree. And I think I often, if you know me, I'm always looking at, okay, what are the barriers to be able to vote? Let's draw an analogy here. Puerto Rico is an American unincorporated island. They pay taxes to the states, but they're not allowed to vote in American elections. If you're a family with 3 kids and you're struggling and the cost of daycare is super high and you don't have the leftover dollars, like you don't have a ballot to cast because you're relying on the food bank and just need that community support. So yes, voting with our dollar is a real vote, and not everybody has the ballots to cast. And that's why we need more local food options and infrastructure. Right? If there are more options for people to put their money into the local economy, they will, right? You know, every time you shop at Loblaws or Superstore, like that money is going to their corporate headquarters. And I don't know if they're publicly traded or not, but there's like those, they're going to corporate offices. When you shop at Local Source on Windsor Street, I was going to say Agricola, they moved, like that money is staying here. Like the owner of that business lives here. Their employees live here. They're getting from farms here. That money stays and it circulates. If you live in the suburbs and you can't afford just groceries in general, like you don't have the ballot to go cast at Local Source. So, you know, we need to increase the capacity for people to vote with their dollar. And that's by having more options, more farm stands, more things like local source in other communities, which goes back to that funding. Let's get the funding for those stores to pop up and to open. And you're opening more ballot boxes.
Epic. I love that. Yeah, there's a ton to dig in there as well. And we should probably just take a nice breather and pause there, because there is so much more to dig into. It's a really good point. People with a balance of $0 in their bank account, they don't have any ballots to cast. Yeah, that's really valuable insight. All right. Justin, just go take a look on Instagram if you have that open. Is there any QA questions that we can answer for folks? Nothing?
No questions. I saw some people coming and going on the live, but nothing in the chat today.
Yeah, nothing on LinkedIn either. One of these days, we'll have 30 questions on each, and we'll have to carve out a whole other episode just to answer them in real time. But thank you for everyone tuning in after the fact. You might be listening on Spotify or YouTube. If you are, follow the show, like the show, rate us on Spotify. That really helps get this whole thing rolling. If you follow us on socials, go throw a like on some of our stuff. That be Instagram, Facebook, etc., etc. Otherwise, thank you for listening, and we'll tune in next week. Cheers, Justin.
See you soon.